was really nice of you.
Net. Tuning and loading caps are left in there. But you can see there's a large inductor in the middle, which is for 40 meters, and the roller inductor takes us all the way down to 160. And then on the right-hand side, there's a relay that I added to switch in about 800 puff of additional loading capacity for 160. And then up above, there's antenna changeover relay, so the whole transmitter is self-contained. Other than that, she's pretty much stock, and it's on the air every Sunday morning on 3815 at about 8 or 9. Well, a little bit of humor involved. What can I say? There's Tom, WB2IIS, the proud owner of this transmitter. He was supposed to be here. I haven't seen him. I don't know if anybody's seen him. Ah, there he is. I thought I recognized that face. But that video camera is obscuring you. And there is the other half of the Buffalo Kilowatt bookends. I guess they will be taking autographs a little bit later after the show. Anyway, moving right along. Another proud owner, and I'm tweaking the tuning controls, bringing in the picture for clarity here, being that this is video too.
Turn up the high voltage. Tim?
Yes?
Turn up the high voltage, I felt it.
You need a little bit of warming there. Well, I don't know, should I tell the story of the fire?
No.
No, okay.
If you want.
Well, it's just more or less a warning for those of you who want to run high power. Make sure your feeders and antenna system are up for it. At Tom's house, he's this beautiful installation. Big feed-throughs coming through the wall. And we're taking the transmitter up through the various bands. Well, we got on 160, made a contact with it, everything is fine. Got on 75, everything was fine. Then tried to tune up on 40 meters, and the antenna tuner was just being very squirrely. And we played with it, played with it, played with it, finally came up with a different tuning arrangement. The thing's accepting power, and doesn't appear like the Q is too high, and the match is working well, and put the transmitter on at low power. Basically, I added a contactor to go from high to low power with the unit. And we flipped the thing up to full power and addressed the microphonium. Yay! And I heard this crackling sound. And I wondered what was going on. Yay! Drop the transmitter, get over by the tuner, hit Tom key it up and say a couple of words. I heard this crackling from the wall. So I had him drop the transmitter, I put my hand on the wall, it was warm, and I went, oh my God. And I grabbed a screwdriver and I bang, 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 punched a couple of holes in the wall, and I saw smoke and I saw some flames, and it's, Tom, you have a fire in your wall. Get water. So he runs outside looking for, I asked him if he had a fire extinguisher. Unfortunately, he didn't have one. So all amateur stations must be equipped with a fire extinguisher. I had one in my shack. 41000 rig once had a fire when the RF choke blew up, put it out. Had to take everything apart because it was a non-halon fire extinguisher, and when I went to fire the transmitter back up, there was a lot of arkage and sparkage. Then at this point, Tom gets the garden hose. Unfortunately, it's frozen. So he gets a bucket of water. By that time, I take a hammer and I knock a hole in the wall and throw water in there. Well, didn't really seem to see much fire. I dug out the insulation and whatnot that was smoldering away. Actually, it was the tar that was the seal between the foil and the fiberglass. Then I put my hand up above and the wall felt warm. It was like, oh my God, it's going up into the floor below. Call the fire department. Well, the fire department rolled up, and that time I punched out all around it, couldn't see any evidence of anything, so we assumed that things were out, which they were. Thank God. Well, the fire department showed up, and they're poking and prodding and asking questions, and then I guess the chief fire person who was there's infinite wisdom said, well, I don't know what the rules and regulations are to a short band radio. Well, end of story. It's a happy ending. There was no problem. Just make sure that your feed-throughs, there's nothing conductive, that there's plenty of space, and that everything is accounted for. And as a matter of fact, the guest speaker who was to be here instead of myself, Tom K1JJ, has a rather large homebrew AM transmitter, and he set a fire that burned up about 4 acres in back of his house when his feed line blew in two. So word to the wise. That's going to be it for this segment of the AM Forum. I'm going to back out of here. I don't know who's going to take the witness stand here.
Tim, thank you very much. Actually, Tom found out just a few days ago that he couldn't come, and Tim made a special trip rummaging through his photographs and came over to the house. We made slides out of them, so he did a great job, and I appreciate it. I would like Tom, WB2IIS, and Joe, K2VXV, to stand, the Buffalo Bookends. They will be signing autographs after the forum. Go ahead, you guys. Buffalo Bookends, there they are. So they got some nice transmitter iron out there. Well, that 50,000 watt transmitter and some of the things that Tim told you, he didn't add that disclaimer at the end. Don't try that at home. Or maybe you should. Maybe you should. Now, next we'd like to hear from Vern, WA0RCR. He has some photos of his gateway bulletin service, and without any further delay, come on up, Vern.
Okay, well, we're going to do a little bit of a talk here on the Gateway Radio Newsletter and Bulletin Service that we run on 160 meters. Talking about fire, we'll have a little personal experience there also, another word to the wise. First off, the first one here, it's nice I can see this as I'm talking this time. Last time it was behind me and I couldn't tell whether I was matching what I was saying or not. But this is me at work at the main operating position for the net and the newsletter, and I've got a monitor scope, got a couple tape decks in the background. I'm sitting there at work at the bench, and looks like getting ready to start the next tape. We've got all the programs that you hear that are not live are fed from one of these 4 decks or 2 stereo decks. And that's a little closer view of the 2 tape decks, and also the RCA scope that we use as a monitor of the modulation. It's fired up now. You can see the red and green lights down on the bottom control panel, lower power supply, and that runs 375 watts in the antenna radiated on the carrier, 160 meters. The cabinet in the middle is our primarily equipment rack, and some more equipment's going to be going in there, a monitor scope and a low power Gates AM transmitter that we'll put in as a backup. But we've got a Duro DAP 310 audio broadcast processing unit in that slender rack mount unit about 1/3 of the way down, and that's where all of our audio processing is done ahead of the transmitter. It feeds a solid state Bogan driver amp on the top, which drives the transmitter modulator stage through a resistive network so that changes in the grid impedance don't reflect back into the driver. It works pretty well. We've got a line RF current meter at the top, and full metering for plate, screen, grid drive, plate voltage, modulator plate, and multimeter in the exciter. And then there's a running time meter in the back of the balloons and that to fly into it, so we painted it. Put some reflectors up at the top for VFR aircraft during the daytime. And that's pretty much the view of the setups. Just a little information on Wednesday, late afternoons and evenings, and also Saturday and Sunday, late afternoons and evenings. Also, we run an early service Tuesday morning at 4 a.m. Central, runs till just before 6 Central Time. And one thing was alluded to earlier about the problems with fire, and that we had a case when I first put this station on the air in Wentzville. I had a RF choke that puts the tower at DC ground, was a little too close to a 2x4 in the tuner house. There's a tuner house, wooden house with metal sides, and it was a little too close to that. And we fired the transmitter up at low power, and if you ever fire up your rig first time, low power, and you see the plate current kind of dancing around, fluctuating around, don't throw it to high power to see what happens. We wondered why it was fluctuating, couldn't see any real good reason why. Everything seemed to be tight, And so we went to high power. All of a sudden I walked outside and there was smoke pouring out of the tuner house. We shut the transmitter off, ran out with the fire extinguisher, and luckily it had kind of gone out. The wood was damp, so it didn't keep on burning. So we got the clearances, but if you see your plate meter fluctuating, check it out before you go on full power. Okay, the Gateway 160 meter net's Wednesday nights only, 8 till after 11:30 p.m. Central, and our bulletin service features the Radio Amateur Information Network this week in amateur radio. The Houston AMSAT net, for any of you that are interested in amateur satellites, that's on Sunday evening live, and we re-air it Tuesday and Saturday nights 1 hour earlier at 9 p.m. And that's for if you either propagation's lousy or for some reason you can't catch it. You can catch it at those other times. We rotate this week in amateur radio on the schedule those 4 nights. That way, if you're tied up one night or out of town on business or whatever, you have some other opportunities to catch it. Now the bulletin services begin on 160 meters, normally late afternoons when the band's basically unoccupied, and this prevents coming on a frequency when someone else is trying to use the frequency and causing interference to a station that's a group that's already in operation. Now the service is especially important to young people, older members of the amateur community that may not, may be on fixed income, not have the wherewithal to buy magazines, subscribe to the internet, etc. And also it's a big boon for sight impaired amateurs, anyone that has trouble reading. Now a little bit about promoting it for the AM community. This camp, you'd be surprised how many new hams, especially VHF and even coded techs that may not have a receiver that tunes 160. And I keep hearing this time and time again. I tell them what frequency and they say, darn, I don't have anything that tunes that band. Well, if you can't talk them into buying a receiver to tune it, which is obviously the best, the next best thing is to take an old radio, and I've got it back in the motel room, a little Sony Walkman pocket radio with the headphones, AM and FM, and I retweaked the slug in that to allow it to cover the lower half of 160 meters. And with that, I've listened, I think, in about 11 different states at night to the bulletin service from my station while I'm out on vacation. In fact, I'll probably be listening tonight in the motel room here in Dayton. And it comes in basically from the Rockies to the East Coast at night on very, very simple radios if the band's in halfway decent shape. But the basic procedure is just take a normal broadcast receiver. Digital can be quite a problem, but just the old analog types. Tune in a station somewhere around 1400 kilohertz. This is for a normal radio, an older radio that went to 1600. Adjust your local oscillator, either tuning camp or there's a coil slug in there. If you move it a little bit and the station does not change frequency, move it back to that spot and leave it. That's not the right one. But when you get it that it shifts the station up and down in frequency, you want to tune this until that 1400 kilohertz station comes in around 1150 on the dial. And if the receiver is designed to go to 1710 as this Walkman was, you only have to tune it down to about 1250. And then when you tune up around 1600, you're tuning around 1850, 1870 kilohertz range. And you can pick it up on a little radio. Some radios you can peak up, you can try the sensitivity again if you turn a pot or a cap and nothing happens. Set it right back to the same spot and leave it. But sometimes you can peak them up, some you can't. This one I've got, there was only one slug. I couldn't find any way to peak it up. I did find if I put it near metal, that seems to compensate for the detuning and the sensitivity jumps up and it works great. But that's all there is to it, and a lot of folks have tried it and they say, hey, that works great. And it's one more way to get the word on 160. I've got some schedules up here if anyone wants one. If someone's got news that they want to get out to the amateur community, you can either send it in to the address, you can call it in at the phone number, and I'll either take your voice. If we're off the air, I can record directly, or you can send a cassette tape to that address, whatever, and we'll try to get the word out as fast as we can because we're here to serve the amateur community and certainly the AM community. And that's the only reason why we do it. Thank you.
As I watched those slides and I heard from Vern and I've heard, like clockwork for years, the service on 160, I just remember the name of that book that's so popular in business the last couple of years, Pursuit of Excellence. With the possible exception of his desk and his administrative desk, everything neat as a pin and runs like clockwork, and very, very impressive. And so he's been asked, hey, why do you stay on AM? But he's committed to AM, and of course with these pocket radios and so on being detuned, and for new people coming on, it's great. So I appreciate you staying on AM. I don't have to show these, but it talks about the restoration of it. There's about 15 slides. How many people would like to see that presentation and dismantled it? I mean, with the exception of that little time delay relay up in the upper left, and I guess one other component there, and a couple of grommets, everything was stripped off this. It reminds me of that old Mad magazine years ago that did a spoof on Dr. Kildare and Ben Casey. And you know, they used to do this little comic strip and of a storyline, but then in the background they'd have sometimes a little comic, some little cartoon. And I remember in the background, as you followed through that strip, there were a couple of ambulance drivers running in through the swinging doors of the emergency room, and on the stretcher was an absolutely bleached white skeleton. And one ambulance driver saying to the other one, "Worst accident I ever saw." Well, somehow I remember that when I saw this, because there wasn't a component on the thing. Next slide, just to show you another time. It was completely stripped. Didn't make it easy to move, but all these parts had found their ways to different places in Ted's storage area. Next slide. Oh, let's see. You can see the SX88 on the desk, right behind it. Okay, next slide. See, that was, I think, the front, and this is the back. So it's as clean as a whistle, and boy, it's great to actually start with a clean chassis when you're working. You know, you can actually play like you're a doctor or something, adding the nice clean things on there. Most of the time you have dirty fingernails working on your. Makes cloth-covered wire in multiple colors, and well, I think it's fairly reasonably priced. But I was also lucky that I found another TDO during this time, which I bought. I had it in my garage, and it had a wiring harness in it. Now it was chewed up a little bit, but I could see how the wiring had been dressed. Was able to, with the wiring harness that Ted retrieved, lay that thing, the control panel, and that control panel has a little a handset on, not a handset, but like a telephone wheel that you can dial channels, or you can dial modes on that. And then it has slide-in decks for relay, audio, RF, and loading up at the top. And if you want to talk to about an SRT-14, there aren't that many around, but he's got it on the air. Next slide. This was of his shack. There he was working on the SRT-14, and he has a T368 and a spare, which I think is good for us to have spare transmitters around. So next one. I think maybe these are the QRP rigs. Next slide. And is there a last slide in there? Yeah, for those of you that work Norm, N3RZU, he has a Humvee, and he actually operates a lot of military radios, and so maybe you'll have an image of Norm next time you see him. Okay, you can turn that off. Yeah, sorry.